You are listening to Talking Star Wars.
Hello, Star Wars fans. I'm Alex,
I'm Connor.
and today we are going to talk about Star Wars.
Like we do, and this is our inaugural. I don't know if I'm using that word correctly. I don't think that's even right, but today is our 52nd episode, which means that we've been talking about Star Wars every week for a year.
Yeah, inaugural means the first one, Connor. So this is
So,
our ultimate episode of our first year and our first season of Talking Star Wars. So thank you to everyone who has listened for the whole duration. It's been a journey, and we will have plenty of content coming soon. We will release an update in our channel in the next couple of weeks about season 2 and what we're doing in the interim. But let's get into the topic today, Connor.
yes, we're going to be talking about one of the most fascinating additions to Star Wars canon in the most recent years, and it's a character spotlight episode on none other than Ahsoka Tano.
Yes, and Ahsoka is now one of the characters alongside Luke Skywalker that we have the most complete view of their life in various stages of galactic history in Star Wars, character growth from a child into a young adult, into a traumatized young adult, and then into an older and more powerful Jedi or former Jedi in after the time of the Galactic Civil War.
I think, we always have spoilers, but we can officially call her a Ronin Jedi, a Jedi Ronin. That might hopefully become an official term, thanks to none other than Grand Admiral Thrawn.
Yes, so Ahsoka, who is banished from the Jedi Order during the Clone Wars, briefly reinstated, and then leaves again after Order 66 by barely surviving, and then joins the nascent rebellion. But so I think let's start by just
Yes.
tracing the line of Ahsoka's life as we know it and what works we've had. Then we'll go into analyzing her as a character, our hopes for her for the future, and breaking down her character, both her character development and the key traits of her personality.
Sounds like a plan. She begins in not one of the most beloved pieces of Star Wars media, although I think that when fans look back on it now, it's a little bit more forgivable, and that would be the Clone Wars film that preceded the Clone Wars series. We have this film that is supposed to transition us from our prequel trilogy to future Star Wars media. And I think that the initial response to the Star Wars prequels was not fantastic. This movie was never intended to be a movie. It was supposed to be the first arc of the TV show, but someone whose name rhymes with Porge Bucas decided, hey, let's put this out into cinemas, in the same release cycle as the prequel trilogy. Fans will love that. And then fans did not love that because it was not a live action quality Star Wars feature. It was 4 or 5 episodes tied together in a very strange animation style that's needed some time to percolate. But regardless, we are introduced to Ahsoka Tano, Padawan to Anakin Skywalker.
Yep, and that is in the Clone Wars movie released in 2008 as a lead up to the Clone Wars series itself.
So,
Um,
how would you say her character is introduced? What would your initial fan response be?
I would say she was introduced as a snarky teenager. Uh, so her characterization obviously started as somewhat of an audience stand-in. Oh, she's in a leggings and a tube top, and she's cool and edgy, and she's Anakin Skywalker's apprentice. Look at her as she tries to care for an infant and calls Anakin Skywalker Sky Guy. So she was the reception to Ahsoka's character, for those of us who were around at the time, was not exceptional. She was largely viewed as detracting from a series where we wanted more Obi-Wan, more Anakin, more people we already knew. And here's this established character a child who is detracting from our badass Clone Wars heroes.
It has some shades of young Anakin in the Phantom Menace, where do we have this character in here to cater to children or cater to teenagers? And thankfully, I don't think that this characterization lasts too long. I mean, if you go back
No,
to our conversation on the Clone Wars, that show has a pretty significant spike in quality, an upward trending spike as far as storytelling and visuals go.
certainly. And through the arc of the Clone Wars show, Ahsoka is probably the thread along with Anakin that ties it together. We see her make good decisions and bad decisions. We see her grow from her mistakes. We see her being mentored by many people around her, directly by Anakin, of course, but also taking lessons from Plo Koon, another Jedi, learning from Obi-Wan, and then even taking lessons from people outside the Jedi Order, such as
Mhm.
under the political and sort of life tutelage of Padme, who she becomes a close friend of Padme Amidala, becomes close with Lux Bonteri, a separatist senator and son of a senator. So when she is exiled from the Jedi Order, makes friends among spice runners and those marginalized by society, has friends among the Mandalorians, murders a bunch of Mandalorians because no one is good at making enemies and allies at the same time as Mandalorians.
Mhm.
So we see Ahsoka as a character being molded and shaped by the circumstances she's around. She faces betrayal. She faces the cost of losing men under her command, and she's like 15 at the time. And I think, as we'll get to later, when we get a flashback during the show of her namesake, Ahsoka, I think seeing in live action a 16-year-old leading men into bloody, murderous battle, I think showed the negative effects that the war had on so many Padawans that were being basically treated as child soldiers.
It's also interesting to consider that Anakin at this time is only 19 or 20. They very much have a sibling relationship
Well,
where I feel
he's
like,
he's
oh, go
he's
ahead.
22 when the Clone Wars ends. So
Hmm.
when Ahsoka's first assigned as an apprentice, he is 20 and 21 and then 22. And I think
Sure.
that's great. And yeah, Ahsoka goes from being 14 to being 17.
And it's a very fun question in the initial movie of why is Ahsoka Tano not uh, Obi-Wan's Padawan? And I think that there are very clear reasons for that because the last time that Obi-Wan had a Padawan, it resulted in Anakin, who the Jedi are not exactly fond of as far as star pupils. And so when we have this next ambitious Jedi, do we give them back to Obi-Wan? No, we're going to try to give them to Anakin in order for Anakin to learn some maturity through teaching, which I would say
Yeah,
it could work if the Jedi had treated Ahsoka and her later trial better.
yeah, and I think it was a good decision by Yoda was recognizing that Anakin needed maturity and stability. And honestly, he was well on his way towards his dark trajectory before Ahsoka was assigned as his Padawan. We see this during his murder of the Tusken Raiders
Hmm.
in Attack of the Clones. We see this on the dark side, his secret marriage, which Ahsoka never quite realizes until when it's far too late to do anything about realizing that Anakin and Padme are more than just close friends.
Hmm.
Um, but going back to Ahsoka, yeah, because it definitely had a good impact on Anakin. And then when Ahsoka is exiled, we see Anakin's fall happen much more swiftly. He no longer has anyone but Obi-Wan to be a voice of reason for him. His trust in the Jedi Order is shaken even more,
Hmm.
which leaves him susceptible to the machinations of Palpatine. And we see that he had an influence on Ahsoka, who did not particularly respond well to the more passive, meditative aspects of uh, Jedi training. She was willful, sort of reveled in her martial prowess, which makes sense during the Clone Wars. Um, and they were hoping that having Anakin being a warrior himself could then uh, help temper that by recognizing those more uh, potentially negative traits in her as a sort of a dark mirror to himself.
Hmm. And what results is that we have this conspiracy of a crime that Ahsoka has committed when it is actually one of her Padawan compatriots who has fallen after her master's death. And the Jedi allow Ahsoka to go through this uh, galactic trial where she could be put to death. And then after, Anakin in true Anakin fashion confronts Barriss Offee, the Padawan that is the actual culprit, brings the truth to light. The Jedi are like, Ahsoka, welcome back. We're going to make you a Jedi Knight now. And she is quite justified in walking away from the Order.
Yeah, we see she never loses her loyalty to Anakin, but she no longer trusts the Jedi Order, which Luke could have used a little bit of that 15 years on when updating his teachings to
Mm-hmm.
not lose his apprentice. But or sorry, 25 years on.
Mhm.
Yeah, we have to remember Ahsoka, we see her from the age of 14 up until her late 40s, early 50s by the time of the Ahsoka series. So we see her the duration of her life.
Mhm.
Well, up until her late 50s.
Right.
Um, but from there, um, yeah, we then enter, Ahsoka's in this sort of enters her sort of first Ronin period where she's given up her lightsabers. She is then seeing the negative effects of the war, from the ground level, as it were. Seeing, just how two sisters, the Martez sisters, survive. Um, in a galaxy where uh, crime syndicates are rampant, and both, as we even know that the Banking Clan and Trade Federation are already playing both sides, and how that's just sort of squeezing the effects. So I think seeing this from almost like the lower decks for Ahsoka sort of makes her
Mhm.
realize just all the negative effects that are happening in the galaxy due to the war, and sort of makes her jaded about the whole prospect. But Anakin and Obi-Wan are eventually able to lure her back for the temporary command because the Maul, Darth Maul, well, not
Mhm.
Darth anymore.
Lord
Maul has,
Maul.
yeah, has become the Mandalore of Mandalore again for escaping from Palpatine's prison and is wreaking havoc. So as Anakin and Obi-Wan are being called to the Outer Rim sieges to attack Grievous, which will eventually lead to Order 66 and their downfall, Ahsoka is given command of a battalion of her own and sent to Mandalore to bring Maul to justice, which she does. Order 66 is called.
Mhm.
She barely escapes with her life, trying not to kill as many clone troopers as possible.
Which we
Um,
can see in direct opposition to Yoda, who, as soon as Order 66 occurs, just whips out his lightsaber and goes ham.
yeah, and I think this is just a difference in their characters. Yoda is a Jedi. He Once he has decided a decision is necessary, he's not angry about it. He is not furious about it. But these are individuals trying to kill him, and I still think Yoda is entirely justified
Oh
in
yeah,
slicing through the clones who are attempting to kill him and have just killed most of the people he has ever cared about.
sure. It's just a
Um,
great way to show the difference where Ahsoka is maybe easy to jump into battle at some points, but also has empathy as to where she recognizes that these clones are under control and not acting on their own free will.
yeah, and this is quintessential against Jedi teachings. Ahsoka lets her personal attachments rule her, and we do not blame her for it. And in fact, we celebrate her. She frees Rex, and she doesn't want to kill any of the clones, but in the end, she's forced to crash the ship to survive. It kills many of them. She buries them, fakes her own death, and leaves.
Mhm.
And for then the next 15 years, she serves as a founding member of the Rebel Alliance along with Bail Organa. There
Which is
are
fantastic. Go
there
ahead.
are a couple of versions of how the story happens. The My favorite one is in the novel Ahsoka, where at first she just goes on the run trying to hide. She attracts the attention of an inquisitor when she settles on a farming planet. She's starting to more form friendships, potentially even fall in love with someone. But then an inquisitor arrives, destroys the whole community, and she kills them and uses his red kyber crystals, purifies them to make her own white lightsabers, and takes Bail Organa upon his offer
Mhm.
to become Fulcrum, the secret weapon of the nascent Rebel Alliance.
Yeah, and it's this event, this appearance of the Inquisitor really galvanizes her and motivates her to become a founding member of the rebellion, which I think is one of my favorite aspects of Rebels, is having her return, her maturation, and to see that unlike Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda, who are in somewhat uh,
Self-imposed exile.
self-imposed exile. I know that Kenobi's watching over Luke, but we can see in his own series that there is much trepidation in leaving the planet and acting. Ahsoka, on the other hand, is performing much as an opposite to Vader, where she is going to land the rebellion and the free galaxy is just all of her strength and resources.
Yeah, so in Rebels, she's certainly a supporting character. She is leery of being a teacher herself, so she serves as sort of a mentor, supportive role for both Kanan and Ezra as Jedi. But before we can really explore that dynamic in depth, other than seeing her just absolutely body some Inquisitors who Kanan and Ezra were struggling to fight, and they don't stand no chance against hardened Clone Wars
Mm-hmm.
general. Ahsoka Tano. She then is forced to face Vader again, and there's been hints throughout that she's suspected that Vader is Anakin Skywalker after, because they were master and apprentice. And so
Hmm.
when he almost shoots her down in a raid, she has a flashback to Anakin and is horrified to realize that Vader and Anakin might be the same person. And then they have a duel to the death. And as good as Ahsoka is, she really does not stand much of a chance. She is probably one of the best lightsaber duelists there, but this is Darth
This
Vader
is
we're
Vader,
talking
yeah.
about. So she manages to wound him, but then would have died if Ezra had not used the power of the world between worlds and rebels to pull her um, temporarily out of time and save her from Darth Vader, who assumes that she was killed in an explosion and then leaves. And then Ahsoka then is able to does not really rejoin the rebellion after that. I think
Yeah.
seeing Anakin has left her disillusioned again, thinking that who can she trust? And we don't really see her emerge again until it is time to search for Ezra following the end of the Galactic Civil War.
And I find that so interesting. It's one gap that we have, much like we do have gaps in Luke Skywalker's history. We don't get to see the launch of his new Jedi Order or its fall directly. With Ahsoka, we have this period of time that really encapsulates the entirety of the original trilogy, where the only thing we see is her uh, on Malachor in the temple. She enters the temple, and then we have that span of time where we're not quite sure what she's up to until she reappears in The Mandalorian.
Yes, where she is pursuing rumors of Grand Admiral Thrawn and likely trying to find Ezra as well.
Mhm.
She owes Ezra her life, but her focus is entirely on stopping Thrawn, who, bombarded an innocent planet and who I think Ahsoka has fixated on as the biggest threat to the New Republic. And I think Ezra really wants peace. And she also advises Luke on things, but she is not willing to join his new Jedi Order. I think
Mhm.
she gives Luke advice and tells him about his father, but is not willing to go to this new hierarchy. And I think sees Luke making some mistakes or some preferences or some choices about the new Jedi Order that she would avoid. But Ahsoka is not a perfect character. She is very much afraid of repeating the same mistakes. We see this in The Mandalorian, where she will not train Grogu because she is worried that Grogu could fall to the dark side like Anakin did.
Mhm.
She and the Ahsoka series, she takes on Sabine, who lacks almost all force sensitivity, but has her head's in the right place mostly as a Jedi apprentice. But then stops training her when she's worried Sabine will fall to the dark side. So Ahsoka, I think, especially after confronting Vader on Malachor, lives in a great deal of fear that she will turn out like Vader did, or that anyone
Mhm.
she trains will become another Vader.
And that makes sense because she idolized Anakin. Uh, just he was the Jedi in her eyes. Someone who is, as we've said, just more active than the actual council, more passionate, but uh, she was unable to see those warning signs leading into Anakin's turn to Vader. So I think you're right in that realization stunted her personal growth, which isn't a bad thing narratively. It's something that she has absorbed and uh, is a bit traumatized by, and I'm sure that she herself is concerned about turning to the dark side.
But we never actually fear the closest that we see Ahsoka potentially falling to the dark side is when the ghost of Anakin Skywalker confronts her in the Ahsoka series.
Hmm.
In the world between worlds, whether this is her mental projection or the force ghost of Anakin himself. I'm inclined to believe the latter.
Hmm.
But it's certainly up to your interpretation, um,
For sure.
where it confronts her for her own trauma about himself, and basically where she's afraid she'll become Anakin, become another Vader. And so
Hmm.
she has closed herself off from sources of support, has become much more rigid in her thinking. Um,
Still
and
willing to offer advice, just not in the same active role.
Yeah, she won't join the Jedi Order. She abandons training Sabine. She travels alone with a droid. She has friends and colleagues and allies, but is not willing to leverage them. Won't train Grogu, and I think it is shown that this is not entirely a noble thing. This is um, I mean, Ahsoka certainly must suffer from some form of post-traumatic stress disorder with all of the battle she was through in the Clone Wars, and then losing her entire people, and then being on the run, and then being pearled through time,
Hmm.
um, and then figuring out that her worst enemy is her former mentor, um, and then again and again having friends killed and ripped away from her with no stability in her life for decades. So, I mean, part of it is it's a testament to her Jedi abilities and training that she's as well adjusted as she is. But I
Hmm.
think the confrontation with Anakin's Force Ghost is an attempt to get her to realize that she is also not him, that she has the ability to grow and change. I mean, literally, she is then reborn and stops wearing gray and starts wearing white.
Hmm.
And then she returns to them now at the turn of the tide, look to the east. She's not quite Gandalf, but, um, she arrives with a army of Purrgil rather than the Rohirrim, and
Hmm.
Peridia might not be Helm's Deep, but she's still wearing white. So,
Very true. So I think that like that is a very natural arc, and the only qualm is that we need to read into it ourselves. It's not spelled out for us, but not everything needs to be, because when everything is spelled out for us, we have fans who decide, I don't like this, much like Luke's decision to, deal with his nephew the way that he did. So we can assume that Ahsoka has gone through a sort of meditative process like Yoda, and hopefully we'll get to see that transition back to searching the galaxy for Thrawn. But yes, we do have her uh, uh, in a great period of self-reflection, come to terms with her relationship with Anakin, and that is both as friends, as pseudo siblings, master and apprentice, and learning her own place in her own development. So at that point, she's able to discover Thrawn, find Ezra, and then become lost in the galaxy very far, far away.
yeah, so that takes us through almost every piece of media that Ahsoka has appeared in. So the Clone Wars, Rebels, her own show Ahsoka. But then there was also 3 episodes of the series, The Tales of the Jedi, that go
Right.
through Ahsoka's very early life and then her time during the Clone Wars.
So she's a baby child. We get to see some of the Tortuga race and culture, which we've discussed in our
The
uh,
Togruta, Connor. This
Togruta.
is this is the Togruta, peoples that populate a forested planet in Star Wars. Not, um,
I was thinking of
it's
the
not
the the pirates.
not Pirate Haven in the
Yes,
Caribbean. Yeah,
close enough. I wonder where I could have gotten that confused. But anyway,
Ahsoka's certainly been to many pirate havens.
mhm. I mean, we've talked about Hondo Anaka, but uh, moving on, but back to Tales of the Jedi. So when we see her as a young apprentice, what do we learn? We get a greater kind of conversation between uh, Anakin and Obi-Wan about her apprenticeship. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we see her from a young age. We see that force powers manifest very early for someone as powerful as Ahsoka, where she is able to befriend a dangerous saber-toothed beast and use the power of animal friendship and mental influence of a animal to bring her back safely. We also see some of her own people. Then we see sort of a brutal training regimen that Anakin put her through, which is ultimately her
Ah,
reason for
yes.
surviving Order 66. Was Anakin prepared her for any eventuality, including being attacked by more than just droids, and
Hmm.
it draws a direct parallel to being able to fend off the 501st when they turn on her.
Hmm.
And then finally, we see her in sort of like a very brief adaptation of the events of the Ahsoka novel, where she falls in with a farming community, is recognized as a Jedi. An Inquisitor shows up, burns the whole village, and Ahsoka defeats the Inquisitor in a single blow.
So that
Um,
gives some bookends to her character. The very beginning of her birth, prior to the Clone Wars show and her apprenticeship, and then directly after the Clone Wars.
I think that's sort of a narrative description of Ahsoka's life and sort of
Mhm.
the major beats in the character development she goes through, from precocious youth to hardened child soldier to disillusioned child soldier to young guerrilla commando fixer to respected um, operative and then to Ronin Jedi.
Mhm.
But
So, yeah.
looking at her more broadly, as a character, I think there are many facets to Ahsoka that we need to examine. There's
Hmm.
her as a warrior, there's her as a teacher, and then there's sort of Ahsoka, her exact relationship with the Jedi Order.
Hmm. And
So
looking at her, it's very interesting because she is our modern day protagonist now that Luke Skywalker's story is complete. And she's a character who's existed before him and ostensibly is existing after him because we don't really get to see what happens to Luke after Return of the Jedi until it's 30 some odd years later. So it's a very interesting way in order to develop a new protagonist since we've had so much time with Luke already.
yes, and I think seeing Ahsoka grow and change over time shows the impact on the Star Wars setting as a whole. She's able to inhabit these many different niches according to, where the setting itself is. During the Clone Wars, she's a commander. During the time of the Rebellion, she's a secret operative. During the time of the New Republic, she sort of is her own solo explorer,
Yeah.
and um, is taking on missions not necessarily sanctioned by the New Republic. Not that the New Republic is sanctioning much of anything at this time. But I think we also need to examine Ahsoka as a person because she often has the ability to sort of disappear into the roles that she's in and commits to them 100%.
Hmm.
So when she's a Padawan, she tries to be the best Padawan, even when she messes it up. When she is a commander, she tries to lead her men to the best of her ability. But I think then that drives sort of when she then can't excel and can't be perfect at it, she sort of starts to abandon those roles when she can't do them perfectly. Um,
Hmm.
she when she is then Sabine's Jedi Master, and she is not going perfectly, and she's worried Sabine will fall to the dark side. She abandons that pursuit,
Hmm.
which Sabine is quite upset about when she realizes that Anakin is Darth Vader and can no longer trust herself in the rebellion. She doesn't return to them until after the Galactic Civil War is over.
Yeah, it's a matter of even looking back to the first time she walked away. This idea of, okay, the Jedi Order is going to accept me back. No, thank you. It's almost as if she comes to terms with something in her mind, and if she can't commit to it 100%, then she needs to become something else. Which, I mean, is what her overarching characterization seems to be. She's trying to uh, kind of purify what her role is, and we can see that perhaps in the Gandalf like costume change. Um, just as a way of trying to figure out her place. Uh, she is not just Anakin Skywalker's former apprentice, but that's also Darth Vader's former apprentice at the same time. So how do you rationalize those two ideologies together?
Yeah, and she sort of embraces her role as the Ronin, that
Mhm.
she recognizes no higher authority. She goes off on her own missions. She will not join Luke's Jedi Academy. Even at the end of the Ahsoka series, she is now in a faraway land, lawless with her apprentice, but now with new life and new goals given to survive in this new area. I think has now stopped running from the power structure she no longer wishes to be part of and is now accepting the fact that she must formulate her own goals. And it shows that even with all the trauma she's gone through and everything that she has attempted and either succeeded or failed at, there is always room for growth and change, much like an Anakin himself, who died at an age younger than Ahsoka is in the Ahsoka series,
Mhm.
having been Darth Vader for 2 decades.
Very true.
She has now outlived the age her master was at and must realize she has many years of life ahead of her. What is the legacy she wants to leave behind?
Mhm. And her story is not complete. Darth Maul has a complete story. While there may be some gaps filled in, his story is done. Same with Luke's. Unfortunately, Luke Skywalker's gone, and we can explore the couple of decades. I would love that. But Ahsoka still has a role. She still has something to accomplish. So we don't know if she's going to be interfering and interacting with the sequel trilogy. It will be very interesting to see if that's the case, to see if she has any role to play in Rey's Jedi Order, or to experience, what is going to happen to Ahsoka. Is she going to commit some sort of sacrifice, or will she have to uh, transcend her role in order to grow into some other kind of being? Some uh, allusions in the Ahsoka show to the Force's father, son, and daughter. And, you know, could she take the place of one of those? Who knows?
Ahsoka is closely tied with the character of the daughter in the mythology of the Force. The great eagle of the light side of the Force, Mirai, appears to her at certain times, both in Rebels and then in the Ahsoka show at the very end, shows up again, indicating that she is once again on the correct path after
Hmm.
having been disillusioned after dueling Anakin Skywalker on Malachor, the Nexus of Darkness.
Hmm. So
And
signs point to that being a possibility.
yeah, just a couple other things to talk about with Ahsoka. On a personal level, Ahsoka is shown to make friends easily, and there's a few times where it's teased that she might have romantic inclinations towards other young individuals in the Clone Wars itself.
Hmm.
Between with Lux Bonteri, potentially with Barriss Offee, um, and that's primarily it. But nothing ever comes of it. In the Ahsoka novel, she gets very close with another member of the farming community, but then Inquisitors show up and destroy that. And for the good of her friend, she has to leave, and does not is not seen to pursue any kind of relationship with anyone, whether Ahsoka has those kinds of interests in anyone or not. Or whether she has decided to forego those as sort of part of her Jedi training or her personal inclination. um,
That's
yeah,
very similar to Luke Skywalker and his inclination towards relationships as well, where he has many possible sparks, but until Mara Jade is introduced, there's still that dedication to the Jedi Order's rule of not allowing for personal connections.
yeah, and even in the current canon with Luke, he has many infatuations, and is even sort of self-critical that he sort of has a thing for Dr. Aphra, and to realizing one, she's not his type, and two, he's not her type in both senses of the word.
Hmm.
Um, but and then I think Luke at some point just comes to terms with himself, but never that we see pursues a relationship. And I think Ahsoka is in the same way, in that she has many close friendships that she treasures, but is not interested or just decides not to pursue any kind of relationship in the same way that Han Solo and Leia find, and that Kanan found with Hera Syndulla.
Hmm.
I'm not sure she trusted herself to let anyone else close to her in that way again.
Right. And with so much baggage with Anakin, it's understandable just to separate uh, oneself from those relationships.
Yeah, and just the only other thing I think I want to go over with Ahsoka is just to note her fighting style and her aesthetic, because it's cool. She starts off by fighting with one reverse grip lightsaber. We will do another in-depth review of lightsaber styles. It's one
Hmm.
of our future episodes. But she starts with the one reverse grip lightsaber, but then halfway through the Clone Wars, she goes through the Gathering again and gets a second lightsaber. So then, and subsequently, we see her fight with two blades in most battle contexts, one longer, one shorter.
And I would be remiss if I did not add that Vader's only other apprentice in Legends, Starkiller, used a reverse lightsaber grip, only to be replaced by dual wielding reverse grips. So something that someone in the background, Dave Filoni maybe, picked up, uh, made me happy. And the dream is still alive that we will get our Galen Merrick at some point.
Yeah, and just to review a couple of Ahsoka's most important martial accomplishments, she is surrounded by four Mandalorian warriors, beheads them with a single blow. She defeats Darth Maul at the height of his powers in single combat. She defeats a mother of the Night Sisters of Peridia at the top of the Peridian Temple, who's wielding the Blade of Talzin and wielding dark Night Sister magics, and she fights Darth Vader himself to a standstill in a
Mhm.
dark side nexus on the planet of Malachor. So, and she even holds her own against Balin Skull, a general of the Clone Wars, who has been, doing nothing but study the lightsaber and prepare for conflict and work as a mercenary for decades. And is implied to be very powerful in the dark side. So Ahsoka is never certainly not omnipotent and struggles against certain opponents, but anyone who is not very powerful in the Force does not really stand a chance against her. But her growth is never really in her abilities as a warrior, which we see through the Clone Wars. After that, it is her growth as a person, as a teacher, and as a Jedi. However she defines that we see going forward.
So yes, I think that's again to sum up our first year of recording. Ahsoka is one of the more well-developed characters in Star Wars lore, and her story is not complete. So it'll be exciting to see what further developments that she will get to take. Look forward next week to not exactly a podcast episode, but a podcast announcement from Talking Star Wars.
Yes, next week we'll announce what's next for Talking Star Wars. Thank you for joining us for our character spotlight on Ahsoka Tano, the Ronin Jedi. And we will come at you with more Star Wars content and content about Star Wars adjacent and related matters, and potentially unrelated matters going forward.
Until then, Star Wars fans.